And today, this is a case study on the administration's use of ArchiMate. So welcome, gentlemen. Well, one of you first, I think.
So, some figures about tax and customs, so you have an idea what we're doing and the size of the organization. This year we will collect about 270 billion euros of tax revenues. We will receive about 11 million tax returns. We pay benefits to about 9 million people. And in the port of Rotterdam there are about 12 million containers per year which have to be handled and assessed. And we do this work with approximately 29,000 employees, of which 3,000 people in IT. So we have a really rather large IT organization. Handling these kinds of volumes is only possible because... No, that's the wrong side. Maybe if I turn it. Okay. Sorry. I messed it up really. Can you get slides back or can I? Okay. Handling these kinds of volumes is only possible because of the high level of computerization. However, continuous requirements, oh, that's the next slide, that's okay. However, continuous requirements from legislation and business, legacy from the early 70s, poor maintenance, shrinking budgets, and so on has led to a very complex IT landscape with a lot of point solutions and a lot of technical debt. As a result of this, it takes a lot of effort to guarantee business support and business operations, and fulfilling new demands has a lot of impact and takes more and more time. Structural improvements of the IT landscape, we need to be better, cheaper, more agile, it's almost impossible. I hope this gives some context at where we are right now. So let's go back to mid-2015. It's here. When we go to mid-2015, we can describe the status as there's a structural lack of overview and insight in the relations between processes, applications, and infrastructure. Do we know what we have? Well, we do, but not as quick as should. Due to this lack, more and more architecture capacity is needed, and there's a limited ability to change. And therefore, we are confronted with incidents during change. The State Secretary, responsible for tax and customs, demands a better performing organization. Operations must be better, cheaper, and we should be more in control of what we do. And in May 2015, the Netherlands Court of Audit published its annual audit report, accounting year 2014. And the Court of Audit checks whether the Dutch central government spends public funds economically, efficiently and effectively. They report once a year to Parliament. The concerning ministers and of course the State Secretary have to respond to their findings and have to take action. So these findings are not just operational issues, they are also political issues. And for the year 2014, the Court of Audit concluded that Tax and Customs is not in control of its IT. The judgment was a serious shortcoming, and that's the most severe judgment the court can give. The judgment included all its aspects of IT, like overview and insight of applications, development tools, hardware platforms, versions of infrastructure, cost of maintenance and operations, resources, and relations between all these elements. Wow, it's working. So, that was the start of the program in 2015. With the following desired outcome: increase the ability for change. That is the most important desired outcome according to management. But it was a political issue. So, as a side effect, we must make sure that the findings of the court will be solved, will be disappeared. And as you probably understand, it depends on the stakeholder which of the two objectives is more important. Senior responsible owner of the program defined more concrete goals. Make transitions in the IT landscape manageable, make sure we have an overview and insight at a level which can be used for adequate analysis, and make sure we have enough insight in the relationships between processes, applications, and infrastructure, so we can use this information in concern budgeting and cost models. And if you know that the cost of the Dutch tax and customs is about $3 billion a year, of which about 550 million euros a year is for IT, and then I mean software, hardware, and personnel, you understand it's interesting to know where we've spent those 550 million euros for. So this was the dull part. Now the interesting part, the architecting ArchiMate part by Lourens. Zoals die licht gaat die goed.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Lourens Riemens. I'm involved as an architect in the Overview and Insight program. And when we first started, and I was in contact with Wim, it was a little strange because we have an architecture practice in place for many years. We are working with architecture from the 90s, a lot of architects. So if someone says there is no overview and no insight, I always think, of course there is overview and insight, but you're asking the wrong people or on the wrong place. But apparently we were not able to do and answer the right questions to everybody, so there was something missing. And we had baseline architectures, we had some assessments, we had transition plans, we had target architectures, but much different. So it was very specific for certain architects or maybe certain domains, how detailed they write it down, or they put the focus on the target or the baseline. So when you have a question which exactly fits in one domain, you can easily ask the right architecture, look in the architecture and find it. But if you have questions across domains or with an aspect which covers every domain, then you have to ask 10 or 15 architects. You get 10 or 15 different answers. You have to have a whole dialogue to get the right answer. So we discussed a little what were the reasons, and then we saw like a lot of architectural information is in documents, sometimes in PowerPoint, sometimes in spreadsheets, sometimes in models, different standards or use of standards, different levels of detail. So it was very difficult to get information quickly and on the same level. And that's one of the reasons the program Overview and Insight was started, with this goal that we want to have up-to-date information on the entire IT landscape on an architectural level. And we ideally want to be able to navigate through the models, start everywhere, like this process, what applications are used, what infrastructure is below it, but also if I have this infrastructure and I turn it off, what applications will be affected and what business process will be affected. So start anywhere and navigate through it. And in our approach, we have 5 or 6 elements which are, I guess, key. I will zoom in later on, but we took an incremental approach which makes it possible to deliver results quickly in a fast pace. We put everything in a central repository, so it was one source. We standardized the information in the repository. We tried to reuse as much as information and metrics as possible. We had an approach where we have central governance but decentralized or local maintenance, and we had in the end one source which is the single source of truth for architectural relevant information. I will zoom in this things. So first of all, the incremental approach, we started with increments of almost 6 weeks with a central team where we prepared the first version of the standard and the guidelines. And then we handed it over to all the domain teams. We have like 10 to 15 several domains in the tax and customs. And they can apply the guidelines, but we also have to guide it and to explain what was in the guidelines and to help. We also needed them to get feedback because certainly in the first versions we have to find out what would be the right level of detail for guidelines or how do we have to describe it. And at the end we could validate if they applied the guidelines in the right way, and in the meantime we prepared the next iteration. So we had Now we do it now for almost 2 years. We shifted from 6 weeks to 12 weeks increments because it's a little more quiet for the domain teams to do. But I guess we have 10 or 12 increments we had now. And one of the key things in the approach was that we want to have a central repository. And we had to define some structure of a repository because it's a large IT department, 3,000 people working on it, many development, but also a lot of architects. And we have to define how will our repository look like. Is it just one big repository and everybody is able to put in things, or do we have to subdivide it? And we have divided it in a central, it was a central repository, but we had different domain models, one for tax, one for customs, one for benefits, but also for technology domains like development tools, data center or infrastructure, technical building blocks. We also had some standards models for the guidelines and the standards. That's more the concepts and the enterprise-wide things we want to standardize on. And we also made an analysis model, which we call a super model, which we can combine all the information of all the models, and we can do cross-domain analysis, which also gives some nice insights. So the first picture, our repository structure looks like this. So on the left you see the governance and standard models. On the right the analysis model. Below the technical models, and in the middle all the business domain models. And there are a lot of relations between models or concepts in models. But this is on a high level the overview of our repository. The second part was a meta model, and you see a picture, and if it's good you cannot read it, but it's a lot of concepts in it. And the first thought was we need a standard how to describe elements in the repository and in the models. And you can say, just take ArchiMate because it's a standard language and you're done. But that was not enough, so we use a lot of things from ArchiMate, but you can do a lot of modeling constructs in ArchiMate in many different ways, so it's not enough to standardize. So we didn't extend the language ArchiMate, but we took some elements out of it, and some elements we don't use or we don't have standards for it. So we say we take a limited set, that's enough to start with. Everybody can do more, so you can use the full language if you like to, but we don't have guidelines and standards on every concept in the ArchiMate language. And I will zoom in some areas of this just to show how it works. So now we have some standards in our Metamodel which are on the business layer. For instance, we have a product, there are business services delivering that product, and processes are realizing those services. So it's very simple, very straightforward. It can also, it's almost too obvious to write it down sometimes, but sometimes we also make discussions about the naming or the level of detail we expect here. And we can have some guidelines like every product should at least have a connection with at least one service or something like that. So we can do a lot of things like that. So there's more, but it's just an example. We also have it on the application layer. For example, this one, an application, it's just a blue box, but we say an application should support a business process, but it can also, for instance, be of a certain type. We have central developed applications, but we also have local developed applications. We have also commercial off-the-shelf applications, and sometimes we have different requirements or characteristics of those applications, so it made sense for us to be able to distinguish different types of applications. So this is another part of it, and we try to make use as much of ArchiMate concepts in our meta model. Sometimes we use attributes, but if it is possible, we try to use an ArchiMate concept. And one of the reasons for that was that we then are able to navigate through the repository also on concepts. So for instance, we can now click on application type, then you show the right side, all type of applications, and now I click on a regular application, I get all the regular applications we have for. So you can navigate also through the meta model. We have different types of this, so this, another one is this one for the use of technology was one of the other shortcomings mentioned by the Court of Audit. You don't know exactly what kind of technology is used where. So with the same application in the middle, we can make a link to hosting services, so we can say what kind of high-level technical infrastructure is below it, but also what kind of development tools have been used to develop this application, and also what kind of building blocks are used. So this gives, you can use it for a baseline, so what is there and how is it connected. But on the left side you see like application pattern. We are also working towards application patterns where we can say this type of application is of this kind of application, and we also want to have some predefined sets of technology, so we can also use this, or maybe in the near future, to do some kind of gap analysis. If this is the pattern, how much of the pattern are you using, and where is some potential you can use. We can use this kind of constructs also. If there's a development tool where we don't have enough expertise in, you can just have one query on the repository and say, give me all applications still using this outdated technology. So this gives a lot of possibilities for insight. And I must say, it is not everything is new, but it was hidden in all kind of documents, and you never know the status or the completeness of things. Another aspect of our Metamodel is about data. So we have application data, but that can also be of different domains, and domains in this case can also have different type of solutions. You have other ways of building operational data solutions than you do for master data or analytical. So we use this kind of things here for. We can also use or add things like data classification for GDPR to it. So that's also one of the benefits of having a repository. When it is already there and there's a new request for something that is almost there, it's not that difficult to add it. So the more you have, the easier it is to extend it with new insights. And the final one on the Metamodel is more related to transition. We also had to give good roadmaps or transition schemes from where we are to where we go. Some way it is a little old-fashioned, because when in an agile way of working, it's much shorter term, so why put everything in the architecture? But on a high level, you need some kind of a guideline and a roadmap where you want to go. And we added like work packages which are connected to requirements and goals. You also see a year here. That's maybe a little strange way of working in the maybe Dutch government, at least in the tax and customs, that we have annual budgets and you have to discuss all your work in terms of a year. And and in this case, it is like a work package should have a result in a year, and then you can also get information out of it, like what are all the work packages we have to do this year, or how many budget is involved in it. So to summarize it, we have all concepts which we standardize, we have in the Metamodel, and when you have to make your own concrete implementation in your own domain, then you have to link to concepts in the Metamodel. And in that way, you can navigate in a meaningful way through your models and your repository. Another important thing was the central governance. That's partly because we made the guidelines there, but also that we want to validate. And it doesn't make really sense to add concepts to the Metamodel if we cannot validate it or cannot define a rule how to validate it. And in the very beginning, we did it by hand. It is modeled on the right way, but it's undoable. But there's many domains, and we have thousands and thousands of concepts in it. So we had an automatic validation of models, and we have, I guess, around 70 or 80 rules now, which say something like every application should have a name, every application should have an owner, data should be connected to an application should belong to exactly one domain. So we have a lot of those kind of rules, which only say if you model it good, but not if it is a good model. So you can still make strange architectures, but at least we can read them and understand it, and we can do automatic validation. And we publish the results every week, so everybody sees their score of the way of working. When we have a new increment of guidelines, we publish it, and you see everybody drops down in score, and then they have 6 to 12 weeks to comply to the new rules, and we see it. And the nice thing about publication is that no one wants to be the only one with the red lights. So it's good to name and shame, and it speeds up a little the work, so that's helping. Another thing what we did was make use of existing information as much as possible. We had a lot of things in place, for instance, for metrics for function points to estimate the size of an application or a change. We had things like maintainability. We have a tool for assessment of maintainability where you can score the parts of the quality of an application. We had also portfolio validation tool, time. Everything was already there, but it was in separate spreadsheets and not connected. So what we did was make import functions into the repository where you can use this kind of information and add it to the concepts already in the repository. And one of the nice things of this is that it saves a lot of time because when you have it in separate lists and spreadsheets, everybody is having their own truth, and they will be maintained separately, and there are always differences. And I guess no one is started to become an architect to resolve differences in spreadsheets, so it's better to have it in one central repository. And just to see here in short the metrics, so I will show some examples of this in a few minutes. And there could be more, so most of the metrics now are on maybe assessment of strategy and on more the static quality, but you could also imagine that we put things in it like the number of problems and incidents or so, or the availability of an application. So the mechanism is there, and if there's a need, we can add it to the repository. And what we also want to achieve was one source, and we used the repository for it, but we can use it for different purposes. One could be and is an online publication, so we make online publications of the repository, so everybody not having an architect tool can still use it because it's in our intranet, so everybody can navigate and search through the repository by publication. We can also use the same repository to generate documents out of it and place diagrams out of the repository into your Word, PowerPoint, or whatever document. We also make some exports for schemes for roadmaps and PDFs or spreadsheets, and we also have an app where you can access the repository from your mobile device, especially introduced for managers who are in meetings, sometimes hear an abbreviation they don't know, they click it in and they can just see, oh, that's that application, that domain, this old, this technology. So these were the 4 or 5 main elements of the approach, and now I will show you some results. First of all, the highest level overview, and this is giving an overview of the business domains which we have, so all the boxes here. For every domain there is like a landscape view, and on the left there are all kind of more or less buttons which gives you insight, so I will show you some. This is an overview of all the applications which customs has. Every domain has now a similar type of application landscape view, and it just gives you in one page all the applications which are there. What we can do with this is that we can click on it and you get more detailed information of the application, but you can also, for instance, color things like heat map type of things. Color everything red which has a bad maintainability or which is end of life within 3 years. So you can do a lot of those kind of insights you can give. Another one on one more level detailed, when we take a single application, you want to know what are the connections of that application with other applications, but also which business process does it serve. So that's what we call an application context view. And I guess there are 200 or 250 in our repository now, so almost every application which is centrally maintained has such a kind of a view. You also get nice discussions on this because if system Plato is giving a service to this one, does this one has the same service and this context diagram. So you saw, especially in the beginning, you saw a lot of differences because if A is using B, does B know, and is it the same thing? So we have a lot of this kind of diagrams, and it's just for an overview, it's good. So it's on a technical level, the pictures will be much more detailed and difficult, but this is pretty much understandable. What we also saw is that you cannot communicate everything through ArchiMate type of diagrams because especially not only managers but also some people in the development, they don't read this kind of pictures very well. So they see boxes and arrows and then they ask are the pointers in the right way, or why do we have different types of arrows, or what is this kind of a box. So they need a lot of knowledge to really understand pictures. So there are also a lot of other visualizations needed to make the message clear. Now one very simple one is scorecards, so we can just count things, and you can say, what's about figures? We have 281 regular applications in production today, and 167 local developed applications. It doesn't really say that much, but maybe it gives you some insight, or it leads to some questions. Why do we have that many local developed applications? Is it because we don't have enough time in the central department to do IT? Do the local people just like to build applications, and are they working for the wrong organization or whatever? For instance, the second one is the number of services between applications, 600. So that's saying something. But when you look at it, there are only 2% of the applications are involved in 60% of the connections. So when we see that as a problem, maybe we have to solve it for only 2% of the systems. So you can also use this for focus, for compare, and also on the lower side, 11 development tools, 18 hosting environments, but we have 80 different combinations, which is very much at least. But so when we have problems with the technology, we can also see where can we reduce, and maybe we have variants of the same technology and where we get rid of. It's always a nice picture, this one. This is like the portfolio validation. The circles are applications. The size of the circle uses the metric for function points, so it says something about the relative size of an application. On the horizontal, you have the business value. There are 8 or 9 questions which business people answer, and they say something about the business value, but it is like the strategic value or the way it supports the business process or the ease of use. And on the vertical, you have technical value, and that's about how maintainable is it, how many incidents, right technology. And when you score this and you put it in a map, it's very crowded here, but you can see very high level. This is the state of the landscape, and the 4 quadrants say something about the type of strategies you can use. For instance, left under is eliminate. It doesn't say you have to eliminate it, but you have to either retire the applications or revise it or maybe rebuild it. And so you can make better assessments of applications in your landscape. What we can do here also is that we can time travel, and we can do a little calculation on it. The left one is what if we do nothing about technical maintenance and functional enhancements for 5 years, and we have an assumption that it will, for instance, decrease 5% a year, then everybody goes to the left. Meaning that we have poor maintainable and poor value applications. Or on the other hand, how much do we have to invest if we want to have everything on the right? If we improve 5 or 10% a year and we can keep that for 5 years, most applications are on the right. So we can play a little with it, we can do this very easily. And because we have standardized everything that works on the total also works on a single domain. So we can exactly have the same pictures on domain level or on enterprise level, which it also makes it easy to compare domains. Lifecycle is another thing we use, so we can see when was an application developed, when was it in use, when do we see it as end of use, and when will it be retired. And we see, maybe not in this picture, but a lot of applications don't have an end date. So we start with it, but we don't know how long we will use it. So it makes it hard to make maintenance decisions or refactor decisions. Sometimes the time we have at end of use is very long, so it takes a lot of time to really turn it off. So it gives some insights and information. When we add all those things, for instance, one of the things was how big is your legacy problem, which is a difficult question, I guess, but we can see how old our applications in production. And our oldest application is almost my age, it's 47, so it's in production since 1970, which is good built application, I think, if you can use it for 47 years. But sometimes you can see the outdated applications. Nobody imagined that we would use it this long. So, and sometimes it's difficult to replace it because we don't know exactly what is in it and how difficult it will be. We also see some things like year 2000, we had a lot of applications in production. And with the question mark, it's a strange year. We only had one application in production, so I'm not sure what happened that year, but was not very productive. And maybe the red line is what below is not legacy, and what above is because maybe an app of 5 years old is already also legacy, and a transaction system of 20 years old is not. But this gives an idea of the age of the landscape, but you can also use it for on a domain level. Then we come at the roadmaps. There was one of the questions, and we have seen this visualization last year in London on the ArchiMate forum, and we tried it. So in the columns are the years. We have all applications which are there in a year, and from left to right, just like a sort kind of a swimming lane, gives you what happens to an application. But we added technical depth to this. Every red application has technical depth, and one of the things we have to do to be in control is get rid of technical depth. And so we have to do projects or work, especially shown in work packages, to, for instance, refactor an application or to improve technical value. And from left to right, we call it sometimes painting the roadmap green. But when we once discuss this type of picture and we can explain it to top management, they can understand this kind of picture, and they can also see, oh, the movement is from red to green. This and this has to be done. But also, if there are some applications here which are still red, they can ask questions. Why are you not having a project to improve that? Or so we have to explain. So it's an easy way to do this. And maybe we have 60 or 70 of these type of roadmaps now, each for a part of a domain. One of the final results, as I already said, we can do all the information on the total. We can also do on a domain, so we can also easily compare domains. So these are some kind of a dashboards from 2 domains where we have similar pictures. You see the bubble charts, but then only for the applications in that domain, or the life cycle, or the maintenance. So we can have a lot of visualizations, but also an easy way to compare domains. So as conclusions, what we did. We had guidelines for business applications and infrastructure layer, later on also for motivation and for implementation. We have standardized views on application landscapes, context, and dashboards. We have some scripts around it to do import and export of metrics or results, and to do automated quality checks. We introduced a self-service type of publication, so every architect can publish their own stuff on the intranet at the moment they want to. And we have the supermodel for analysis. And what we achieved, much more consistency between different domains, so it's easier to compare diagrams and products from different domains. It's good for sharing, for understanding, maybe getting some solutions from one or the other. Information is available for everyone, so we publish everything. So everybody who has access to our internet can access the information. We can use it for analysis, maybe a little bit on ad hoc basis, but we can do it. And we can standardize our products more than we did before. We still have some wishes, so still difficult to deal with things like scope or time aspects. So am I looking to a baseline or a target, and how do I see the differences? I would like to check changes. Is this up or down? Sometimes we have to deal with different levels of architecture, and if it is in one repository, how make I distinguish that? We have to think about ArchiMate 3.0, some new concepts which we can use. Now, what was already in the introduction, we are much more moving to an agile way of working. It also have some impact on maybe the level of detail or the way we model roadmaps. And we, in the end, want to like that this is daily work of architects and not that it is a program needed to do this. So the last one for me. So what was very important for us, do it in small steps, because you cannot think this in advance and prepare everything and then throw it over the wall and say do it. So short cycles with feedback. Visualize and publish was very important because that also is good for quality when it is much more used. We have to think about push and pull. There are not that many demands from management, like give me this report or give me this insight, but sometimes we say, oh, if we have this information and we can combine it, we push the information to the manager, say, hey, we can now show you this, and when they see it, they say, oh, that's nice, can you also make this one? And so it's push and pull. And I think what really helps is that it is a combination of management and architecture, because we tried this before from architecture, but that it's more like an option you can do or you can do not, and the combination makes it much stronger that we have to do it. Now I give the word back to Wim for the famous last words.
Still working. Thank you. So, besides these results and conclusions, there's at least one stakeholder who's very interested in, and what about the court of, the judgment of the court. 2014, the court judges there's a serious shortcoming in operational management. Well, that was before we started Oversight and Insight. In 2015, we just started mid-2015, so we didn't do enough to give it another outcome. In 2015, the court still gave the judgment severe shortcoming in operational management. In 2016, last year, we made a lot of progress. A new report, a new judgment. Well, no new judgment. A new judgment, and it's just, there it is. It's just a shortcoming in operational management. It's not good enough. We still have a lot of work to do, but at least it's much better than the most severe judgment the court gave the 2 years before, like a serious shortcoming. So, we are proud of what we accomplished. We even got to the Dutch newspapers. It's in Dutch, sorry, there's no translation. But it says, all knowledge is now in one database. Repository is a too difficult word for the newspaper. So all the knowledge is in one database, and there's one integral planning, and that's the roadmaps. So, still a lot of work to be done. So there's a lot of work for me and for Lourens for the next years and our colleagues. Thank you for your attention.
Great stuff, gentlemen. Please take a seat, and apologies for the technical challenges. But always good to have the backup, huh? The paper. We've got a lot of questions generated here, so I won't get to every one of them. Apologies, but hopefully you can grab the speakers in the break if I don't get to your question. But please elaborate on the involvement from the business side were they hands-on in the business architecture artifacts?
Well, our organization, we have an IT department which consists of information management, application management, and infrastructure. So internally, if we talk about business, we mean information management. Dus at first hand, in the first place, it was information management. Nowadays, a business is more and more involved in this program.
Right.
So the roadmaps Lourens showed about the application landscape, we're also using it for the business landscape.
Right. Okay. So increasing involvement, yes. I guess. Okay. How did you make the distinction between ABBs and SBBs in the central repository?
Yeah, we model both, and ABBs for us are more like logical building blocks, and SBBs are implementations of it, so we can have different products. Sometimes there's one product, so and it depends on in what level you want to see overview, so you can make a connection with an ABB, just to give a logical overview of what it is, but also on a more implementation level with concrete SBBs. So, and in that way we can make a difference between sometimes different vendors or products or different versions if we think that's relevant for architecture. So we have modeled them out.
Okay, next one. In your increments or sprints, do you just do project work or do you include EA line type of work?
This was only, yeah, what, I don't know if I know for sure, but...
Project, yeah, it's a question about, is it just project work in your increments or EA line type of work?
I think the second one, because architects have maybe two roles. One is to do project preparation for certain topics, and the other one is to keep their domain level architecture in place and on up to date. And overview and insight is much more on the second one. So it's like a continuous activity of architects. But with the increments we said we want to improve this one in the next 6 weeks or 12 weeks. And they do it besides their other work, and we try to make it more daily part of their work and not as an extra type of work.
Right. Okay, thank you. Let's see. What team do you have to maintain the repository? Specifically, who edits, who develops, and what about governance?
Well, we decided not to centralize everything. Most of the architects working in the program do this on a part-time basis. Dus they do their normal work and they do the work in the program. So we have architects from the application layer for the guidelines for the application layer, ditto for technology layer. So part-time for the program, we come together every 2 weeks. And besides that, they do the normal
the day job.
The day job, yeah. And the day job is implementing our new guidelines.
Right, right. Let's see. What would you say were the advantages of using ArchiMate compared to other modeling languages?
I don't think we make a comparison because we were in the very early days involved already in ArchiMate, so it was already there in our organization, so we did not have a discussion on whether to use ArchiMate or not. So we use some other standard, but it's more on the project level things like UML or BPMN or things like that, but it was not a discussion at that time to use or to use not ArchiMate. That was maybe 5 or 10 years before already. So it was just there. So we just looked if it is good enough, and it was, so it's okay. No need for another standard.
How much resistance to the approach did you see from domain architects?
Well, I wouldn't say a lot. Most of them are very enthusiastic, but they also have their own way of working. So it's a balancing between those two. And because most some of the architects are making up the guidelines, that's good for the resistance, of solving the resistance. But there will always be some resistance because every domain says, well, this is very specific for my domain, so I must do this a little bit different. But if they do it different, enterprise analysis will be very difficult, so we won't allow it.
I think what really helped was that we were able to make the visualizations and the publication, all those kind of things. So it's also saving them a lot of work. So in the beginning, they have to maybe change their way of working, but when you have to publish every week and you have to do everything yourself, or you just click a button, it's making a lot of difference for the architects.
Yeah. And of course, are the architects responsible for the work? We will make the management responsible for the results.
Right. So I'll end with this one. And at the end of the day, what are the main business benefits or the main contribution to the business of the project? The really hard benefits. I mean, you're moving from severe shortcoming to shortcoming, but other impacts on the business.
I think one of the biggest impacts on the business is that they can or must acknowledge that they have an old landscape that have to be modernized. A legacy has to be approached, resolved. Now they can see all kinds of red in the roadmaps, and now we're going to use it for the business as well. So they have a standard to show it to our own organization, but also to the responsible politicians.
Okay, thank you. And I've got to ask, it will resonate with Open Group members. In the center of several of your diagrams and on the list of applications was Plato. What's Plato in your sense?
In Dutch it's plannen en toedelen, but it's a system for customs which they use for inspection officers who get assignments to do inspection control system.
Right.
But
so it's sort of like an acronym or
yeah.
something. Okay. Gentlemen, Lourens and Wim, thank you both very much for coming and sharing your experience with us. Thank you. Thank you.